2 full hours of the best Dogman stories begin right now. Welcome to Scary Stories. I'm your old pal Bigfoot, and I've got over 2 hours of scary Dogman stories. Nothing but Dogman. However, first I have a very short announcement. Just finished a music video I got hired to do as part of Gary Summers' rock opera. The song is a duet featuring Chris Farlow, who had a top 10 hit way back in 1966 that was written and produced by Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones. Now he's playing the voice of my cartoon dinosaur. Gary is premiering the video September 15th, which in some realities is today. If you're curious, you can find the link in this video's description. And now, onto our Dogman binge-watching party. Take it away, Bigfoot. It's about time we got started with my first story. By request, we're going to have photos of Frank the Black Cat again today. The story doesn't have anything to do with black cats, but a lot of you guys tell me you like cats and Dogman, so tonight's show mixes Dogman with cats. And we call this story Dogman at Dusk. Dear Scary Stories NYC, sunset had always been my favorite time of day. Now it just makes me tense, and I no longer see any beauty in it. All of the magic of Magic Hour has been drained away by the Dogman at Dusk. I grew up enjoying dusk at my family's secluded summer home near a place called Little Penny, California. Little Penny is situated up on top of a long line of mountains, or, well, at least tall hills, with valleys to the north and south. From one spot on our land, about a 3 or 4 minute walk into the woods behind the home itself, we could watch the sunset over both the mountains and valleys. It was so incredible that every day it wasn't rainy, I would drop everything to trot out to what we within the family came to call Sunset Spot. When my parents relocated back east, I basically moved into the house in Little Penny. I was in my mid-20s. I was making good money working part-time online doing jobs which are all antiquated now. Just as important to me personally back then, I had a girlfriend in Boonville, which is relatively close by. Not much else is actually near Little Penny, which is what I liked most about it. Absolute privacy. Hardly anybody knew about it back then. To me, quiet equals luxury, so that was the most luxurious place in the world in my mind. The Sunset Spot was also good to sit at during the day if you wanted to really get toxins out with a good long sweat. It worked for me better than a sauna. I would do it once a year most years. Just hydrate a lot before, during, and after. That was my philosophy in those days. So it was a special place for me. It felt sacred. It felt safe, too. Magical and safe. My illusion that I was at cause over that part of the universe was proven silly and childish once the Dogman put in his appearance. And I guess this is the point in my narrative when I should get down to actually telling you what happened. First of all, the Sunset Spot is atop a steep incline facing to the west. I've never gone very close to the edge, as falling down that hill would probably be pretty painful. I suppose it could do even worse than hurt you if you had unlucky breaks on your way down, but I'm not trying to say it was 90 degrees. I think most able-bodied adults would be able to survive the drop or even arrest their fall and climb back up. Still, I was always afraid of falling, so I sat on a somewhat flat rock some ways back from the edge, and I would prune the trees and foliage at the beginning of each season so as to maintain the excellent view of the sunsets from that location. One evening, I was sitting on that rock, completely lost in a particularly mesmerizing and colorful sunset, and over the edge of the cliff I was sitting some ways back from, there poked the head of a dog. I reacted with a start, popping to my feet in a defensive pose. Once I saw it was just a dog, I started laughing at myself. But then, that dog lifted itself up over the ledge and proceeded to stand up on its hind legs, tall and proper, just the way your kindergarten teacher told you that you should stand. I tripped while trying to back up. I wanted to keep my eyes on the thing, but I also wanted to get out of there. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to actually accomplish either. If you think it's humorous that I was frightened of this upright walking puppy dog, let me give you a description of what I was sitting on the rock looking up at. Have you ever seen a Rottweiler? Have you ever seen a crocodile? You know how the croc's teeth are so long that they come out over the upper and lower lips randomly, unable to fit inside its mouth? Well, I was looking at a Rottweiler that stood like a man and had teeth like a crocodile. He had to be taller than a grizzly bear. I don't like to use numbers, but he was a lot taller than a normal guy. He was way up in the air. I'm 6 feet, and it was clearly way bigger than I was. Also, it was muscular like you would expect a big wild animal to be. It looked wiry. It looked like it could be fast if it needed to be, and I still wasn't sure what its intentions were for me personally. The large, upright canine jerked its head in my direction and began to growl. It moved lower to the ground, and I got the impression it was thinking about pouncing. I wanted to get up and move, but instead I found myself covering my face with my arms defensively, lying there on the rock, crying. I listened as the creature came closer, its growl growing louder and vibrating the rock underneath me. It sounded like it was just a few feet away. I heard it snarl, and I heard it pounce, and I closed my eyes and screamed, and then listened as the Dogman ran off into the woods behind me. It had leaped clear over me. It must have seen prey behind me. I wonder what it was chasing. A rabbit? A deer? One of my neighbors? I probably would have heard about the latter, so I assume and I hope it was some animal that it chased off. Needless to say, I had to go home the way the Dogman had gone in order to get back to my house. It was pretty dark by that time, and the forest behind my home no longer seemed like home to me. I knew I needed to wait a while and hope the Dogman would go far away, but I also had to get going soon or it would be pitch black out there. I pretty much just did some deep breathing exercises to calm myself, and then I got up and started walking through the brush toward the family home. I knew the path back like the back of my hand, and I knew I could probably walk it blindfolded. Instead, that night, I had my eyes open as wide as I could have them, my ears as well, and I even kept my nose on alert to report any odd or bad odors. I didn't accidentally want to come upon a predator and his prey, after all. I just wanted to get home. Every time I heard any movement at all, even a breeze, the adrenaline would kick in and it would feel like this horrible experience was happening all over again. By the time I made it to my yard, I ran the rest of the way and then spent some time locking every single window on both floors of the place, as well as the basement. I jumped at every noise for the rest of the night, and by the next day, I was a wreck. I wanted to know what that was that I had seen. It had jumped over me as I lay there with my eyes shut. It could have taken me, but it didn't. What was it? I couldn't find anything online about the creature, so I started studying predators in general. I learned enough about nighttime in the forest to scare me off camping for 3 lifetimes. Now, when I see the colors in the sky that come with the sun going down, I no longer am able to appreciate the transcendent beauty of it. I stare at it instead of gazing. I feel tense inside and make certain all my doors and windows are securely shut and locked. Now the sundown is no longer a time of magic. It's only a warning that the nighttime is coming. And so are all the evil things that walk around at that godforsaken time, such as the Dogman at dusk, coming tomorrow. I felt I'd better warn you in advance about this one. Alligator, versus Dogman. That's tomorrow here on Scary Stories NYC. Tricked by the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, some people think that the Dogman is merely an uncatalogued canine species. I can't agree with that. They're too smart to be thought of as just dogs. I should know. I got tricked by the Dogman. This is a story that happened to me when I first moved into my home around 11 years ago. It's the only time I've ever seen a Dogman or any cryptid, and it did not scare me off of nature, at least not forever. I don't want to say where I live, but it's an area known for its beautiful birds. I'm a bird watcher as my hobby, and that's one of the reasons even Dogman can't scare me away from here. If you're into bird watching, you may be able to guess where this happened roughly. If not, I'll just say the northeastern United States. I was out bird watching in the natural areas that are within walking distance of my home. As it began to turn into late afternoon and evening, I began to walk back. I wanted to take a different path from how I'd gotten there, but I didn't want to stray too far off because I was not yet familiar with these woods. As night started to come on, I followed a dirt path through the darkening forest. I kept thinking I was hearing the sound of an owl ahead, but I wasn't sure exactly what kind of an owl. Still, it sounded like an owl of some sort, and I grew excited that I might get to see something I'd never seen before on my way back. Finally, I did see them. The two eyes of the owl. I could tell that's what they were because of the golden yellow eye shine. I've never seen an animal with eye shine like owls. The bird appeared to be 9 or 10 feet up off the forest floor on a branch that was relatively parallel to the ground. As I approached, I estimated the owl as being 2 or 3 feet tall, so the eyes were about that high above the branch. Something about the entire setup gave me the creeps, though. Something told me not to get too much closer to that owl. I remembered I still had my binoculars around my neck from earlier, so I decided to try and get a closer look at that bird. I regretted not having night vision on the binoculars, but I wasn't in the habit of exploring or birdwatching at night. From what I could make out, standing there, looking through those lenses, was not much more than I could see with the naked eye. The one odd detail that was unmistakable and yet unexplainable too was the way the bird seemed to extend below the branch as well as above it. At least, the shade of brownish gray which I was perceiving as the owl seemed to be the same shade of brownish gray beneath the branch as well, and I could see no bird feet on that branch, although I wasn't sure if that was only because of my angle. My eyes were telling my brain what they were seeing, but my brain wasn't making sense of it at all. I took off my backpack and got out my emergency flare. I was thinking that I might spook the animal, but I also might illuminate the situation enough that I could see what I was looking at. You can tell how scared I was in that moment, because I'm not normally the type to want to disturb wildlife in even the mildest of ways. So I did it. I set off the flare, careful to avert my eyes enough not to blind myself. I managed to keep a good look at those owl eyes as I did this, and almost immediately, I understood that I was not looking at an owl, nor was I looking at any kind of bird at all. There was a figure standing behind the tree. It wasn't standing on the branch. It was standing on the ground. Only its head protruded above the branch, and that head had yellow eye shine. It appeared to be a man-shaped figure, but either wearing fur or else maybe that was its own fur. The owl head seemed far more like a dog head, but one with that odd golden eye shine. Apparently annoyed, making a grunting snort and giving me stink eye, this figure turned casually, revealing the canine profile on its head with tall, wolf-like ears standing up on top. Then he just walked away in a sort of a huff. I guess he had been planning on ambushing me, and since I had spotted him, he decided to call off the attack. He had me convinced that he was an owl. He did that deliberately. That implies he understood how I would see him standing there in the dark. He knew I would think he was an owl. He knew it would make me drop my guard and walk closer. How did he know that? If he's a nocturnal creature, then he must be able to see better in the dark than humans can. Did he actually understand that I am diurnal and that my eyesight would be more limited than his? How could he know what I was able to see? How could he forecast in his mind what my behavior would be? It implies so many things at once: an ability to empathize with another, the willingness to use that empathy to trap and kill, the mental acuity to be able to run simulations in his mind to predict outcomes, and even more that I'm too frightened to consider. Like, was he able to read my mind or see through my eyes in a literal sense? I would like to say I can rule that out, but unless Penn and Teller can tell me how this was just a prank, I'm going to go ahead and say that I've been fooled by the Dogman. If you ever are so unfortunate as to encounter one of these creatures, whatever you do, above all, I beg you, please do not underestimate them. They may not be as intelligent as humans in all ways, but in other ways we're not as smart as they are. I found this out the hard way because I got tricked by the Dogman.
And now, for a special surprise treat, instead of me reading the story as I had said I would, how about I present my mentor, the man who taught me everything I know? Ladies and gentlemen, my entire career has been a pale impersonation of the fellow who is about to read this next scary Dogman story to you. Dogman got inside my head, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've had a lot more free time to watch YouTube and other kinds of videos lately. My wife and I are mostly out of work due to the pandemic, but through a series of circumstances too involved and boring to repeat, we've got alternate revenue streams functioning, and we're oddly doing better right now than we were before, knock on wood. So we're working less, earning more, and watching tons of video as we put on weight in the air conditioning. It's the first time I've ever had to look back on my life in retrospect, and it's the first time I'm coming back around to deal with a set of traumatic situations that befell me when I was a boy and a teenager. It was so upsetting, so frightening, so inexplicable and bizarre that I had swept it under the rug as I built a sane and logical adult life for myself. If I had focused on this too much when I was younger, I never would have had the life I have now. Because back then, I was under the control of something I think you today might refer to as a Dogman. I don't mean to say that my life was always under the control of this being or entity. When it would come, it would be in control for a few days or a week, then mercifully, I would be left alone again for a while. My parents saw it too, at least that one time. I noticed it first and gasped. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. This was a demon in the night at the far edge of our backyard. It was fur-covered like an animal, yet you could see that it was demonic. If you don't believe in demons, then I don't know how to tell you what this thing looked like, because it appeared to be an embodiment of pure evil. It didn't look at you. It glared at you. It didn't walk. It stalked. It stomped. It paraded. It skulked. And all on its hind legs like some mockery of a human sent by the devil himself to torment. Even though the body was largely a hairy version of a man's, the disgusting head was more like that of a dog. It sickened me to see it, and the word that I think would best describe it would be abomination. I remember seeing steam rising from its nose as though it were freezing outside, yet this was a hot summer night. It was an unnatural thing. After my gasp, both parents looked out the window, and I turned to watch their expressions change. I could tell they were seeing it too. My mother went over and pulled the shades to the window shut, then sent me to bed.
"Out of sight, out of mind,"
laughed an uninvited voice in my head. That was all it said on that occasion, but I would get used to that voice soon enough. It was the voice of that thing, and it could throw its voice right into my skull. Every time I saw or heard the creature after that, I was alone. It would wake me up at night, usually the night before an important test or event the next day. The commentary was always condescending, insulting, undermining. It was like the worst bully from school, but even worse. It seemed to know things about me, personal things, and it seemed to know when it could bother me the most. It was, I guess, a kind of vampire in that sense. Maybe it was feeding off my misery, or maybe it just enjoyed being annoying. Like I said, the creature would leave me alone for long periods when I could get my schoolwork done and only have the normal problems a kid would have, but then I would begin to get stressed over some upcoming school project or test or maybe a conflict with a friend or girlfriend, and then the creature would be back. It would appear the way they say Sasquatch do, standing in the tree line at the edge of our backyard, peering out and staring at our house. Whenever I heard the voice, I could look out the window and see it there, looking back. It was my personal nightmare and my personal embarrassment. I couldn't tell friends about it. I had to lie to girlfriends and teachers about why I would sometimes be so tired during the day. It was a constant drain on me, yet somehow I managed to get through high school and went off to college in a different state. I was so busy away at school that I didn't even notice that the creature was no longer in my head until I went home for Christmas that year. I didn't see the creature then either, but being in my old bedroom brought the memories all back. I realized then that the Dogman or demon or vampire or whatever that unholy thing was seemed to be tied to that land. When my parents informed me during my sophomore year that they were looking to sell my childhood home, I heartily encouraged them to do it. How many kids would urge their parents to sell the place they grew up in? Probably the same amount that grew up with Dogman on their property. For the most part, though, my childhood memories are happy ones. It's remarkable how much I managed to block out the fact that Dogman got inside my head.
We had a poll last week and you guys voted by a large margin to say that you wanted to see the story that we've got today, Dogman versus Dogman. And we're very excited to announce that today's show was made possible by our newest executive producer, Bianca Gutierrez. We're so happy there is the lovely Gutierrez from New York to Sri Lanka. She's the best Bianca. Thank you, Bianca Gutierrez. We couldn't keep going without kind people like you. And if you'd like to be as cool as Bianca, who isn't from Sri Lanka, just become a channel member by clicking the join link below. You'll get a secret uncensored story each Sunday night and access to our growing archive of over 10 hours of scary uncensored stories far too wild to tell on this channel. Hey, how do you say this word? When I was growing up in the Bronx, anytime I heard the word on TV, it was pronounced Appalachian. But these days, about half the time, I hear it pronounced Appalachian. Is either more correct than the other? If you have information to educate this New Yorker on that, please leave it in the comments. I'm not sure which way I'll pronounce it in this story today, but if I get it wrong, please correct me and I'll get it right next time. And now, the event that got delayed from Saturday night, the story you guys voted for in our poll, the creepy tale we're calling Dogman versus Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have seen a Dogman twice. Or actually, I saw them once, but there were two of them at the same time. It happened a pretty long time ago, during a period of my life I'd mostly rather forget, but I'll do my best to dredge the memories out of storage and dust them off for your entertainment. This was back in the earlier 2000s, when cell phones were small and flipped open like Captain Kirk's communicator from the Star Trek TV series. Are you old enough to remember those phones? As I've already indicated, it was a bad time for me personally, as my marriage of only 2.5 years had ended in divorce. But if that hadn't happened, I'd have never been up in Maine, hiking the 100-mile wilderness. I needed a real getaway, and the internet of that era told me that the 100-mile wilderness was one of the most remote hikes in America, and that it was the most remote part of the Appalachian Trail. There was even a warning that it should only be attempted by expert hikers. That sounded perfect to me because I wanted a real challenge. I wanted something that would take my full attention to survive, so that I wouldn't think about anything bad that I had no control over. I was so sad that it was either I jump off a building or I take on a challenge like this. There would be no space for self-pity if I were alone on the Appalachian Trail in the 100-mile wilderness. They call it the 100-mile wilderness for a very good reason. You're not going to see civilization for at least 4 days when you set off on that trail. Sometimes it can take far longer than 4 days if you're inexperienced or just run into bad luck. It's a dangerous thing to do, and I would advise against doing it alone. But I was in a state of mind where I had to do something death-defying just to get back to feeling alive. Although I just told you not to try this hike alone, I'm now going to appear to contradict myself when I tell you that it's definitely a bucket list trip that you should make with a well-prepared group if you're still young and healthy enough to attempt something as strenuous as this. The reason is the intense beauty of the entire trip, or maybe the word beauty doesn't really suffice. It was beyond lovely. I would cry several times a day, experiencing chills up and down my body, just for seeing some of the places that exist on this earth. It's so majestic. I wondered why I had just spent half a year involved in petty squabbles when I could have been truly alive, walking under the pines and wading through the shallower parts of Bear Creek. I would imagine that Bear Creek is named that for a reason. I kept an eye out at all times. If you come upon a bear and surprise him or her, you will discover that they can run very fast. I've heard that they will sometimes, if they see you first, hide and jump out on you as you pass them. But I've also been told by others that bears are not smart enough to do that. The guy who said he saw it with his own eyes, though, he was one of the most grizzled outdoorsmen I ever met. He didn't seem to have a reason to lie about it, so I just decided to assume it was possible and avoid walking too close to anything that a large creature like a bear could hide behind. I had originally planned to take the hike in the shortest amount of time possible. Once I was a day or two in, though, I began to realize that the sooner I got done with this hike, the sooner I would be back to dealing with petty, spiteful human nonsense instead of the horribly stunning transcendence of nature. I found myself taking my time after that realization. I would wander off the trail into the forest, taking care to mark the way I had come in so that I could find my way back. I just wanted to see all of it, every part of the trail that I could see. I knew the chances of me ever going back to Maine were virtually nil, so I gave myself permission to explore every square inch. I did see other hikers, but only 2, and they were spaced apart by over a day the way I remember it. I gave them a lot of space and pretended I didn't see them, allowing them to move on out of my area before continuing. It was very lonely, and it felt so good. I would find the most obscure places to pitch my tent. I wouldn't make a campfire. I didn't want to be too noticeable. I would rise with the sun and go to sleep right after watching the sunset. After 3 or 4 days of this, I had no idea how much further I had to go on the trail, but I knew I was starting to feel like a human being again. I hadn't even understood how dead I had become. 72 straight hours without anybody serving me papers or lying about me on the internet. I don't think we even lied about each other on Facebook yet back then. I think we only lied about each other on LiveJournal and Friendster. Maybe MySpace if you had a band. I had escaped from all that fake crap, and I was living a real life again. I began to feel, as the week wore on, that I needed to find a new life for myself that would incorporate more of this. Not necessarily this particular hiking trail, but more of this recognition of what really matters. More time away from spiteful, backstabbing human beings, and more time facing natural dangers. If a mountain lion attacks you, that means it's hungry and trying to survive. There's a nobility in that. If a human being attacks you, that doesn't even mean anything at all. It is the definition of meaninglessness. So, I was feeling free, and I was depending on my wits, and I was feeling more and more confident because I had really been on a good luck streak. Like most people, when things go wrong, I find someone to blame. But when things go good for a while, I'm there ready to claim credit. So one day, when I thought I was near the end of the hike but really was still very much in the middle of it, I wandered deep off trail into the woods. That was where I came upon something that took my breath away. There was a row of, I think, 7 or 8 trees broken in half, with the top half upside down, leaning diagonally against the tree trunk. The leaves on the top half were beginning to wilt and die, which means those trees had not been broken all that long ago. I inspected several of them up close, stunned and terrified. Whoever or whatever did that could be very close by still, and so I wanted to study the trees quickly and then disappear. These trees were all split off around the 6-foot level because I had to hoist myself up a bit to look at the tops of them. They had all been broken, not cut. There were no marks of an axe or any other tool. They had to have been pushed over at some point higher than 6 feet until they broke off. Each of those tree trunks was as wide and thick as a man's torso or thicker, so in my mind, I tried to imagine what kind of tools or equipment would be needed to make something like that happen. I really wanted to believe it had been done by man for some logical reason, but I wasn't finding any evidence to support that theory. I knew what I thought had happened, and it really made me scared. I thought I was wandering in the domain of the Sasquatch. I had heard they would make primitive structures or turn trees upside down to warn other Bigfoot to stay out of their hunting area. I had not heard of this specific method of tree breaking before, but I couldn't see how it could have been done by man, or why man would have wanted to do such a thing in the middle of a very remote forest off of a very remote hiking trail. It was already getting to be later afternoon, and I wanted to camp as far away from the Bigfoot turf markings as I could manage. That meant no more dawdling or exploring. I was going to head straight back to the trail. I was going to stick to it, and I was going to walk as fast as I could until setting up camp at sundown. As I exited the forest, I remembered things I had read that said the Sasquatch people will sometimes hide in the forest, and there may be several or even a dozen of them all around you, watching you. It was a stupid thought to remind myself of in that moment. I wanted to cry, and I nearly did. After hiking on the trail and watching the sunset, my fear had begun to fade, and I started to feel good again. I had some rations, Then I crashed out in my tent, snoring away. I woke up in the night, having to relieve myself, and by then, all my fear had disappeared as sleep brought with it the feelings of comfort and security. I yawned and stumbled around in the darkness and found a spot to do what I had to do. As I was in the process of doing my thing, something rushed past me from my back left to my back right and kept running off in that direction. It was something large because I heard it pushing vegetation aside from the ground up to over my head. My mind raced for images of a forest animal in Maine that was taller than I was, yet could move incredibly quickly through the forest. The only image that sprang to my mind was one of Bigfoot. I was about to turn and run back to my tent when there came a loud, angry kind of dog barking from back in that direction. I dropped to the ground to make myself as small as possible, and I gawked around, wondering how many large animals were around here and why a dog was barking at the Bigfoot. I wasn't really awake yet, but that was changing quickly as panic set in. I wanted to get back to my tent, but I didn't want to run into either the snarling dog or what I thought was the Bigfoot in the process. After some amount of time, I could hear the snarling dog move in the same direction that the original large creature had moved when my back was turned. I now had a clear run back to my tent, so I stood up and made a dash to get back there while I might not be noticed. While running, something caught my eye, and I turned to see something that made me inhale all the air in Maine as I gasped in the biggest surprise of my life. I didn't see Bigfoot over there, no, and I didn't see a dog barking at him either. I saw something far stranger than that. What I saw was two dog-headed men, each threatening to go at it with the other one. These things looked like dinosaur dogs. They had to have been 7 or 8 feet tall, oversized, thick-legged, muscular-armed, and standing on their hind legs. It was all territorial displays and trying to frighten the other one into backing down. I hadn't seen either dog attack the other yet, but they made a lot of attempts to snap at each other. I moved closer, as idiotic as that sounds, and I hid behind a bush to watch the two of them, each trying to look larger and scarier than the other one. I pulled my flip-top camera out of my pocket, and I wondered if I could get a photo with it. If you're old enough, you remember that those phones took tiny pictures. I think they were 640 by 480, and you needed plenty of light to make anything out in the image. Otherwise, you'd just be taking a photo of pixelated grain. Even at the time, I must have known that, but for some reason, I actually thought I could get a photo of the two dogmen in the dark. While I was trying to line up a shot, I began to notice things that I hadn't earlier. For one thing, the two animals looked more different from each other than I had first noticed. The one had glowing eyes, whitish-yellow glowing eyes, and a light grayish kind of a fur. It had a wolf-like head with tall, pointed ears on top. It held its paws in front of it, and when it attacked, it either snapped at the other with its teeth, or it swiped with its claws. The other animal was much darker in its color of fur. It also had a wolf-like head, but I did not notice the intense eye shine that the lighter-colored one exhibited. The darker one also was shaped differently. It had a chest more like that of a man, and it had shoulders, whereas the gray dogman had a torso shaped more in a canine fashion. Then, something happened that really set the two of them apart from each other. The bigger, darker dogman tore a thick tree branch off of a tree and began swinging it around. I was stunned to realize that this one had paws that worked like hands. He was able to use the branch as a weapon. He was able to create a tool. I tried to get a better look at the gray one's front paws, and I couldn't due to all of the battling and maneuvering going on, but I'm pretty sure that one's claws were not like hands at all. These were two very different species, it seemed to me. Not only was there a dogman living in the woods of Maine, but there were two different kinds of them, and they didn't seem to be getting along very well with each other either. I got the shivers when I made the connection in my mind. That dark dogman tore the branch off the tree. I just saw him do it. What if he was the one who broke those trees in half to mark the edges of his territory? It was this darker dogman the entire time. I suddenly wished I could go home. I wished I could go jump in my car and drive home, go to bed, and pull the covers up over my eyes. All of a sudden, the idea of being in the middle of the 100-mile wilderness entirely alone didn't seem as magnificent and awesome as it had up until then. All of a sudden, the spiteful, backstabbing, jealous humans didn't seem so bad after all, not when compared to these two behemoths that I was watching battle. The fight over who could act scarier seemed to have been won by the smaller, lighter-colored dogman, the one with the glowing eyes. He was making the most terrible sounds I ever heard, like a dog being tortured or something. But he clearly wasn't in pain. It was, I guess, some sort of battle cry. The big, darker dogman seemed to understand him, because he tore off through the underbrush again, and the gray one ran after him. I took my opportunity to escape back to my tent, which never looked so flimsy and indefensible before. If those two dogmen ran out by my tent, they could probably end me just by tripping and falling on top. I don't think they'd even have to use tooth or claw to finish me off. Still, I had no place else to go, so I huddled inside my tent, too frightened to sleep. I sat there listening for their approach. At one point, I heard howling. Then, I heard it again about a half-hour later. Was it closer the second time, or further away? I couldn't decide. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff neck. I had fallen asleep sitting up in an awkward position, and I would pay for it the rest of that day. I packed up my tent and got ready to hike, a little bit stunned, a little bit tired, and quite a lot humbled. I had seen not one mythical beast come to life, but two variations on the same theme. It seemed extremely unlikely to me before that week that something like a werewolf could actually exist. In fact, I will just admit that I was certain they did not and could not be real. But there were two dogmen there, and they could not have been related to each other. They were physically different, and I don't just mean fur color. One had hand-like paws, the other had dog or wolf-like paws. One used tools, the other was far more savage. And even though it was smaller and seemed less intelligent, the gray dogman had the darker, larger dogman at a disadvantage throughout most of the entire experience. I stayed on the hiking trail, and I made good time getting out of the 100-mile wilderness. I had had enough of nature, since my experiences had taught me that nature can be as big a pain in the neck as civilization can be. And I learned that while watching the knockdown, drag-out fight between Dogman versus Dogman. I hope it's cool and dry where you are. It's hot and wet in this story, though. It takes place in the Florida Everglades, a place of tropical beauty, yes, but also leeches and ticks and snakes and those little lizards that crawl really fast over everything like cockroaches. Ew. In short, this story takes place in a modern jungle, and yet the title sounds like it belongs on the marquee at Madison Square Garden. Dogman. versus Lizard Man. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was in my 20s back in the 1980s, I was kind of insane. Whenever I get angry at my son, he asks me if I never did anything crazier than what he's done, and I always have to admit, I was a lot worse at his age than he is. One time, I nearly got myself and my friends into trouble with both a Dogman and a Lizard Man. At the same time, I probably deserve some kind of an award for that. I spent a year and a half living off the grid with a group of friends. There were 4 of us. Me, my girlfriend Tandra, her brother George, and his girlfriend Mandy with an I with a heart on top of it. Mandy wasn't really cut out for living off the grid in the 1980s, so eventually George replaced her with someone far more gutsy and outdoorsy than all the rest of us combined. She was in her later 20s and therefore 5 or 6 years older than the rest of us. But that meant she had a car, she had a bank account, and she had some kind of status in science somehow so that she could get us into nature areas we wouldn't have ever even heard about. She basically knew everything, so let's just call her the brain. The brain taught us how to do the things we had been doing in a less stupid way, saving us a lot of work and money in the long run. We started camping in wilder areas for longer periods of time and missing society less each time. For me and Tandra, this period was kind of a Garden of Eden. We were able to witness and experience nature at its most raw, and yet do it in a relatively comfortable way due to the foresight, knowledge, and awareness of the brain. It seems she always noticed each emergency before it happened, and dealt with it before we even understood what was happening. She had some kind of a degree in forestry or something fancy like that. And so we found ourselves in a swamp in Florida, in the Everglades, I think. We were on a lake or a river or something to that effect. The sun was incredibly bright, and I had lost my shades. The sun reflecting off the water was as bad as the sun in the sky, and I was bored. We had never found a safe spot to camp the night before, and so we were in our rowboat, taking turns sleeping and rowing and watching out for snakes and gators, and down there even crocodiles sometimes. I was really the only one who had gotten any rest, and the others looked ready to pass out. I remember the brain was rowing, and I kept telling her that I could row and she could take a nap. Finally, she relented, and I took over. The 3 of them, somehow, squished down into uncomfortable-looking positions and all managed to catch up on their sleep as best they could on the bright, hot afternoon in the not very large rowboat. Now, I couldn't see very well since it was so bright, so I remember just closing my eyes and rowing. I was facing away from the direction we were moving, not paying attention, not looking where I was going. It didn't matter as long as we stayed in the main part of that body of water. But after some time, I noticed it narrowing. With the land moving closer to us on both the left and the right, there was less reflection on the water to have to squint at. I could open my eyes again, and so I did. And then, immediately, I screamed. There, standing no more than 10 or 15 feet away on the shoreline, stood the most frightening-looking thing I had ever seen. This was scarier than any movie monster, because it was real. I was staring at a dog whose head was somehow connected with a human-like body, a hairy, bipedal monstrosity, standing, I would guess, around 6 feet from the top of its head to the bottoms of its dog-like feet or paws. It was a female dog, I could tell by looking at her chest and belly, which were exposed as she was standing straight and tall like a proper lady of refinement. That was the only proper thing about her, though, as her fur was clearly matted, tangled, and filthy. Her ears were tall and black. Everything about her was black except for the sun, reflecting off her wet eyes as she stared at us with that confused expression that dogs sometimes get. At least I thought she was staring at us. My screaming woke my friends, but before any of them could even say one word in reaction, our boat was hit by something from below, and we overturned, throwing all of us in the water and sending us scrambling for the far shore on the opposite side of the Dogman. Once we were on what passes for land over there, we were able to turn back and see what had done this to us. And what we saw was even harder to believe than what I had already seen. Okay, you're gonna laugh, but this thing was like the creature from the Black Lagoon. Only its head was shaped more like a salamander than like a fish. It was a lizard-like fishman of some sort, and it had burst out of the water to try to grab the female Dogman and pull her down under with him. Except the fishman underestimated the Dogman lady. She was uninterested in washing that dirty hair of hers, and so the two of them were locked in a battle, the likes of which I had never seen. The Dogman ripped a branch off a tree to throttle the Gillman with, but the Gillman took it away from her and chased her around, into the water, and then out again. The mud and rocks and vegetable matter were being flung in all directions as both animals howled in pain and fury. We were pelted with all aspects of the swamp as we made our getaway while we could. Much of our equipment overturned with the boat, including our photography equipment. We still had one tent and some food in my backpack, which I had been wearing, but other than that, we were in trouble. So we walked for about an hour, then walked back toward the scene of the epic battle. The entire time I had a knot in my stomach because I had a feeling all of our stuff was destroyed. Still, we had to salvage anything that might be left. I also felt that at least one of the monsters might still be there upon our return. Well, I was right about the first part, but there was no sign of either of the monsters back there. The boat was smashed to smithereens. All the photography equipment was wrecked, but some of the food, which had been wrapped in plastic bags, miraculously remained unopened. We had to ration what we had left, but we knew it would be enough to get us back to civilization to buy some more. And so life went on, the drudgery of it, and the adventure of it. We just had to focus on our personal business in order to get back to someplace where we could restock our supplies. We never really had time to sit back and reflect on the fact that we had just seen a battle from right out of the Stone Age. We had just witnessed Dogman versus Lizard Man. Take this next story, for example. The guy who sent it in tells me that it's true. Does that mean it is? He could be a she for all I know. I never met this person. I'm not going to call them a liar, however. If he says that he and his family ran into Dogman outside of Dollywood in Tennessee, then I'm going to tell you his story. And that story is called The Dollywood Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, do you get many Tennessee Dogman stories? I've got one for you that happened 7 years ago when my family and I went to Dollywood. No, we didn't see a Dogman inside an amusement park. We saw it outside, where we were camping nearby. Let me start at the beginning or else I'm gonna confuse myself again. How it started was I got a raise and I was happy, and I made the mistake of saying over dinner that maybe if we were lucky and no disasters came up, we could go on our first real family vacation that summer. I said maybe and if, but they only heard the word vacation, and then the conversation was limited to where the vacation would be, not if. My daughter wanted to go camping, while my wife and son wanted to go to Dollywood. I sided with my daughter because camping sounded cheaper. Then, our neighbor, whose name I won't mention, convinced my wife and kids that we could do both. We could go to Dollywood in the day and go camping at night. My wife looked into this before telling me of the plan and discovered that there was a Yogi Bear-themed campground right near Dollywood. She basically told our daughter that we could stay with Yogi Bear, before I heard about any of this. Now, I'm not trying to be old-fashioned about money or anything. It's just that back then, I had a job and my wife did not. She didn't really even know what we could afford or not afford in a literal sense. I handled all the bills and gave her the amount she said she needed to run the house each week. She didn't actually know what was left after that, and I never got the impression that she cared. But I think she thought we were richer than we were. So I had to be the bad guy and tell my daughter that we weren't going to stay with Yogi Bear. We were just going to walk into the forest behind Dollywood and hope we could find a spot to camp for free that a ranger wouldn't arrest us for staying in. I could maybe swing the Dollywood and the camping equipment, but I couldn't afford to rent a patch of dirt to put the tent up on. We were just going to have to wing it as far as that went, and if we couldn't find a spot, then we were going to have to sleep in the car. Ingenuity is the mother of America, as my grandfather used to say. No, he wasn't senile. He was a comedian. So, we made it to Dollywood. Then, instead of going inside, we walked around the back of it looking for some forest land we could camp in without anyone noticing us. I picked a spot of dirt that seemed hidden away, and I set up the tent while my wife worried and fretted that we were trespassing on someone else's property. I asked her if she had seen any no trespassing signs, and she had not. I pointed out that nobody was using this little patch of dirt before we came there, and probably nobody would be using it after we left either. If someone needed it while we were there, they could ask us to move, and then we could move. This is the benefit of a tent. You can break it down and set it up somewhere else. She was convinced that we were going to get arrested or something. The rangers don't want to arrest a family out camping because they don't want to listen to screaming children. Nothing I said calmed my wife, but once we were inside Dollywood, then she and the kids all had a blast. I have to say I did too. I had never been to an amusement park that large before, but of course, I've never been out to California or Florida. It wasn't just fun for the kids. My wife and I had a ball too. I really didn't expect it to be as much fun as it was, so I have to give Dollywood top ratings and highly recommend you all check it out if you're passing through Tennessee after this health thing is over. So we were tired and happy as we made our way back into the forest to our tent, and we found it all exactly as we had left it. That seemed to calm my wife down a lot, and we all toasted marshmallows and hung out for a while before bedtime. It wasn't even midnight yet when all four of us were awakened by a loud howling in the woods near us. It was pretty close, or at least closer than I'd ever heard that kind of a thing before. I wasn't sure if it was a wolf, or a coyote, or what, because the howling was so different sounding. It was deeper. It lasted incredibly long. Whatever made that sound had big lungs, I'll say that. My son suggested that it was Bigfoot, which got my wife and daughter all upset. I told him it was not Bigfoot, and that he better keep his trap shut. The howling stopped, and we all tried to get back to sleep. I was fast asleep when my wife nudged me awake again, telling me something about how there was an animal outside. I could hear the growling, even as she spoke to me about it. I wanted to go outside, but my wife wouldn't let me. I lost my temper because I refused to let some stray dog tell me when I can sleep or not, and I began shouting at the dog to back the hell up. The growling stopped. Furiously, I unzipped that tent, telling my family to zip it up after me and stay inside. I looked all around outside, and I didn't see anything there at all. I could smell that zoo smell, though. I could tell that there was either an animal very close by, or there had been extremely recently. It smelled like a big animal, too. More like an elephant than a dog, really. Well, whatever was here is gone now, I said out loud, and I asked my wife to unzip the tent so I could get back in. As I turned around to face the tent again, I got the surprise of my life. when up from the ground rose the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It was a monster, just like from the old movies, but a lot more realistic looking and a hell of a lot smellier. It was directly on the other side of the tent, the back end, and I was on the front end. It was not a wolf or a coyote, exactly. It was something that stood like a man. It had been crouched down behind the tent when I turned around, completely hidden from my view. Then it rose up, just like it was taking the elevator up. What kind of animal stands straight up in the air like that? I don't even know if I could stand up that way. It was the spookiest thing I ever saw in my life. I jumped up and backward, and how I didn't scream in shock, I do not know. This thing had a chest broader than my shoulders, and that chest was right at my eye level. He was hairy on every part of his body that I could see, and I could see him till just over his knees. This wasn't a gorilla or a chimp. It was hairier than they are on the chest and belly area, and its head wasn't like any kind of monkey I'd ever seen a picture of. This wasn't a Bigfoot, but it was just as big as a Sasquatch is supposed to be. It was the head that was the most frightening thing. You know those old Egyptian paintings with the man who has a big black dog head? Well, this thing looked like the horror movie version of that. Imagine that ancient Egyptian god had reverted to savagery and had become a caveman version of his former godlike self. A fallen god. A fallen angel. And what are the fallen angels anyway? They're devils, that's what they are. I was looking at something that belonged in hell. The eyes of the creature glowed an orange kind of color. Whitish orange, I would say. They were captivating and I couldn't look away. I don't think it was hypnotizing me or anything. I think it was just that they were so bright in the darkness. I was not carrying a flashlight, and there were no other lights in the vicinity. I admit that the moon was almost full that night, but that still does not explain that intensely bright eye shine. You're not supposed to look a dog in the eye, and you're not supposed to look a predator in the eye. I stared this thing in its glowing eyes, though, and it stared right back at me. It was the single most incredible moment of my life. This was more than just a predator. This was like an alien sighting. It was certainly a real animal, judging by its odor, but it was different than anything else that's ever been in the woods of North America or any other country, I would guess. This was something out of the ordinary. This was, as I said, a fallen god. I began to feel as though we were both equal beings, two intelligent creatures, and it honestly felt as though we were about to be able to communicate in some form with each other. Then I heard the deep growling again. It tickled my feet on the bottom. Then it rose through my legs and vibrated my entire body. I went from a feeling of amazement and first contact between species to a feeling that I was about to become a midnight snack. I shrunk myself down quickly and climbed back in the tent with my family. They asked me what was happening. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I sat there, trying not to look terrified, as I felt deep horror inside myself. If that creature wanted to get inside the tent, it wouldn't be a difficult thing. My family begged me for information, but I didn't know what to tell them. Finally, I put my finger over my lips and indicated that they should be quiet. Soon, the growling died down. I never heard the 7-foot-tall Dogman leave, but he had stopped growling. My family fell back asleep, but I stayed up, waiting to hear that creature go away. I never heard it. In the morning, I made the family stay inside while I walked around the camp to make sure it was safe. I found nothing out of the ordinary. The ground was hard enough around the tent that I didn't see any tracks either. I would have chalked it up to a hallucination if my family hadn't been there with me. So my wife and kids went to Dollywood for a second day, but I stayed behind in the tent, crashing out and catching up on the sleep I lost the night before. Round about 3 p.m., someone rousted me out of my sleep, telling me I was trespassing on their land. I packed up and spent the rest of the time waiting in our car for them all to get done inside Dollywood. And although I kept my eye out, I never again caught sight of the Dollywood Dogman. This is one of those Dogman sightings that happen suddenly and without warning, almost surprising the witness to death, and that's part of the reason we call it Fury of the Minnesota Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a short but very scary Dogman encounter for you. It happened in Minnesota, which I didn't even know had Dogman in it. I will be honest up front. I am a fan of cryptids, and I have always wanted to see a Bigfoot and a Dogman. I have contemplated trips to Washington State to see a Sasquatch, and Wisconsin or Michigan to see a Dogman. It turns out, all I had to do was drive around in my own neck of the woods for a while. If you're not from Minnesota, you probably never heard of the Sax Zim Bog. It's a huge square bog that goes from a community called Sax to a place called Zim, hence its name. I'm sure it was much larger in the past, but we humans filled in the edges and made use of them, eventually leaving the big giant square wasteland that we now call the bog. Of course, it's only a wasteland to us. It's vitally important as part of the planet's ecosystem and all that sort of thing. I'm not an expert, but that's what they say. Personally, I'm glad it's there, even though it's a scary looking place, and I think I'll give it a wider berth the next time I need to drive around over there. The Sax Zim Bog has all sorts of wildlife, from rabbits to hares to foxes to deer and even moose. Watch out for the moose. They aren't as cute as they seem on the Bullwinkle and Rocky show. First of all, they're incredibly large, just prehistorically large, and they completely freak out for the slightest reason. Like, have you ever seen a cat flip out and fly out of the room, knocking everything down just because someone sneezed or a truck backfired outside? Well, moose are like that, except they're bigger than horses. So, I'm not joking. If you see a moose, keep quiet and get the heck out of there. It's not a predator, but they're so angry, nervous, and stupid that they're sometimes even more dangerous. I don't just bring this up randomly, as there is a moose coming up later in my story. So, there is a road that cuts across the bog. I mean, there are a lot of them, but I'm referring to this one in particular that cuts across diagonally from northwest to southeast. It's the one that goes right past Pinkwalled Lake. I was driving just northwest of Pinkwalled Lake, going to pass it shortly one dark, overcast day a few weeks back, driving my pickup truck across the bog to run some personal errands on the other side. I could see the lake off in the distance to my left ahead of me. That side of the road was all low to the ground and looked like quicksand or wetlands from my perspective. I've never gotten out and tried to walk it, so I didn't know if I was right or just guessing. At any rate, on my right were trees tightly packed into a small forest. I was gazing off at the lake coming up on the left, and I guess I must have gotten into a bit of a daydream, because I barely avoided hitting a huge moose that suddenly came barreling out of the woods to my right. I was going the speed limit, but even so, it took me almost all the way to the lake to come to a complete halt. The moose ran madly across the road and into the other side. I could see it was all scratched up on its hindquarters, which I assumed were self-inflicted. It probably went berserk in the woods and scratched itself up on the branches it ran through at hyper speed. I saw the beast lumber off the road and run by the lake. The ground looked muddy, but that moose just kept on running, so it must not have been quicksand. I sat there, my heart going 1,000 miles an hour, hyperventilating and charged with adrenaline for a few seconds. Then, relief hit me as I realized I had barely avoided a complete disaster. "Stupid moose," I shouted, then laughed at myself and the situation. How fortunate I was to get to laugh off this incident. I wasn't hurt. My car wasn't destroyed. I came out completely scot-free. A wave of gratitude came over me as I was thankful just to be breathing. I never understood what a gift life was before. I became sentimental and overwhelmed with sweet emotion as I prepared myself to resume my day in a more appreciative way than I would have if this incident had not occurred. Before I could get the car restarted, a horrible scream came from the woods, and as I looked over, the vegetation literally exploded outward, scaring the bejeebus out of me as I leaped in my seat and covered myself with my hands instinctively. Out of that explosion of vegetation fired something I had always wanted to see, but now regretted having made that wish. It was an upright walking, bipedal, canine, with brown fur, broad, man-like shoulders, and a savage-looking wolf-like head. I screamed and ducked down in my seat as the Dogman ran directly at my car. I thought he was going to ram right into me, but instead, he leaped up, bouncing off the roof of the car and continuing his run on the other side, never ceasing his awful screaming. He didn't sound like a dog. It wasn't barking. It was sort of moaning and bellowing instead. It didn't sound exactly like a man, but it probably sounded more like a man than like a dog. It wasn't howling for sure. So that Dogman was not interested in me. It was interested in the moose. Maybe that moose wasn't as stupid as I thought. Maybe it had good reason to be freaking out. It certainly made me think again about where those scratches on the hindquarters might have originated from. I hope the moose got away, but I will never know, because I got that car started and I sped out of there like the chicken that I am. All my life, I wanted to see the Dogman. Then when he literally ran over me, I ran home and hid under the covers. I don't mind if you mock me for it, I'll mock myself, but by the same token, you shouldn't think that you would have been any less surprised and shocked than I was. After all, it's not like I had any advanced warning at all, and it was in an area I never knew had Dogman in it. Okay, I'll stop making excuses for my cowardice now. The main thing that remains for me out of this horrible experience is the look on that dog creature's face as it single-mindedly pursued the moose. It was so terrifying to see the utter hatred of the moose it had in its eyes. It was completely cold, and it was going to end that moose forever. I still get chills thinking about the fury of the Minnesota Dogman. He claims he saw a Dogman that acted a lot like a big cat, and we've entitled his narrative, "The Tree Climbing Dogman." Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story that my wife loves when I tell. That's because it's the story of how she saw a Dogman that I hadn't even noticed, and she might have saved both of our lives in the process. This happened, believe it or not, in Yosemite National Park. I don't know if Dogman is even supposed to live there, but that's where we had our strange encounter. She and I had been camping in the park, and we had gone for a walk after dinner and before bedtime. On the way back to camp, we were cutting through a grove of trees, and she grabbed me, making me stop. Motioning, she indicated a big, thick branch overhanging the path in front of us, only about 15 feet in front. What I saw stunned me. It appeared to be an inky, black, big cat of some very large size, hanging on that branch, ready to pounce on whatever or whomever passed underneath him. We both stood there surprised for a few seconds, then began to back away, never taking our eyes off the creature. What happened next was even more unexpected, though, as the cat appeared to almost melt down off the branch onto the ground, creating a new silhouette that you guys might recognize as that of a North American upright walking canid, or dogman. It was not a cat. It was a canine, and it was standing there on its hind legs, glaring at us as though challenging us to take one step closer. We did the opposite, and we lived to tell the tale. My wife says the moral of this story is never go camping without your wife, but I say the moral is keep your eyes to the skies. If you aren't looking up, you'll never notice the tree-climbing dogman, the dogman of Hollywood. Dear Scary Stories NYC, just to the west of Hollywood, Virginia, there runs a creek called Wolf Creek. It's shaped like a tuning fork lying on its side if you look at it on a map. The main line of the creek continues eastward to the south, while we call the other branch of it the North Fork of Wolf Creek. I had been wandering along the creek that day, starting from a point to the west, and I had just come to the fork. I realized I was at a fork in the road in my life, too, so the flowing water really held my attention. As I stood there, contemplating whether I wanted to go left or right in both the literal and the figurative sense, I enjoyed being right where I was, and being who I was, the one who had not decided yet. I still had the potential of both choices in front of me. The sound of the water and the way the air smelled were both so comforting and refreshing. It was extremely enjoyable just to be present in the moment in that place. I was wondering why I couldn't have that same feeling the rest of the day. Was it really impossible to carry the feeling with you? Or did I have some invisible internal sensor turning off my ability to feel good all the time about everything? Don't worry, Dogman was already nearby when I was thinking this stuff. He'll be in the story soon, but this is my story, and I'm going to tell it my way. You see, the stuff that was on my mind that day was stuff that happened between me and a person who had been involved with a theater that I don't really want to mention, but I feel I must for this story. The name of the theater is Wolfbane, and that just seems like too much of a coincidence not to talk about it. I had thought I was becoming close friends with this particular person I won't name, and I attended a performance they had worked on at Wolfbane as well. I had thought that I would be spending a lot of time in and around that theater, but suddenly things changed drastically between us, and we both simultaneously got caught up with other people. We didn't break up, since we had never actually gotten together, and even though I was happy with the new people in my life, there was also a sense of regret that I had lost this other person in the process. I also had to come to terms with the idea that all my expectations about the theater and other mutual friends were now also no longer going to happen. A number of things I still felt an excitement for in my belly were never going to manifest in this reality, and that carried with it a sense of loss and mourning for what could or maybe should have been. As I'm writing this, the theater itself has been closed down for months, obviously. I suppose everyone involved has been coping with what I was coping with that day about 11 or 12 months ago when I stood at the fork of Wolf Creek, really only a few miles northeast, a 20-minute drive away from the Wolfbane Theatrical Company. I apologize if you think including these personal details was superfluous or self-indulgent, but Wolfbane, or Wolfsbane, is a werewolf repellent in the legends and movies at least some of the time. Why are things around Hollywood, Virginia, named after wolves and werewolf lore? This area of Virginia has many stories to tell, and many more, which may have been forever forgotten. I noticed a secluded little spot where I could sit and watch the creek split into two creeks for a while, and allow my mind to digest all the ideas it had been taking in lately. I was leaning back against a really comfortable tree, partially hidden behind two bushes on either side. I still had a nice view of the water, but I would be mostly hidden in the late afternoon shadows to anyone looking at me from a distance. You'd have to get within 15 or 20 feet, I would think, before you would even notice that there was someone back where I was. I felt as safe as you can feel while completely out in the wilderness, and I even started thinking that this might be an excellent place to take a tasty little nap. All of that was forgotten in the next second as I saw something that got my heart pumping as fast as a tiny little bird that you hold in your hand. There was a dog-legged, dog-headed Bigfoot wading out into the water. It was looking down, I don't know at what. He wasn't drinking the water. I never saw him fishing either. Maybe he was looking at his own reflection. If so, what he was seeing was a head like some kind of a timber wolf, but shoulders like an NFL all-star. He was walking bipedally on legs that bent like dog legs, and he held his massively muscular arms out to the sides, as though for balance on the slippery creek bottom. Actually, I don't know how slippery that creek bottom is since I've never walked in it. I also don't know how deep it goes. If I knew that, then I would have a better estimate of the size of this animal. I have searched online for werewolf costumes, and there are some that have legs somewhat like what I saw, but made for a human to wear. That is, they appear like dog legs from certain angles. It seems extremely unlikely to me that I was seeing a human in one of those kinds of costumes. For one thing, they walked from one side of a creek to the other. If that was a costume, it was going to shrink up on the legs and feet, and good luck getting out of it without cutting yourself out. Why would someone go through hours of costuming and makeup just to ruin your work with a 7 or 8 second walk through flowing water? To my mind, this had to be its real fur I was looking at, not costuming. If that was a makeup special effect, then I hope whoever created it has since been hired to work for large sums of money, because they are a genius. It seems far simpler to me to just accept that it was some real kind of living thing. I know it's still possible that I was hallucinating or being made to see something by some unknown corporate or government agency, such as that which Nick Redfern says happened at Rendlesham Forest. I know there may be other possibilities that I am not aware enough to guess at, but it still seems to me that if it felt like I was seeing a real animal, then chances are I was seeing a real animal. This was some kind of an upright wolf adapted to using its front paws as hands. I think the resemblance of its shoulders and chest to human construction was the result of parallel evolution, not actual interbreeding of the species. This kind of wolf's DNA must have sensed that it would have a better chance at survival if it had hands rather than paws and arms rather than front legs. It found a way to accomplish this, in a way which is similar to how our ape ancestors' DNA solved the same problem. I think that explains the man part of Dogman. In my opinion, what I saw was 100% canine, and not human or anthropoid or simian in any sense of any of those words. But once again, I'm going on my gut feeling of what I saw as I peeked out from between those bushes. Obviously, I was no longer in the mood to take a nap. It was like I just had sugar injected into my blood. I wanted to run, but I had to hold still. I listened as the dog man walked out of my line of vision. I wasn't sure if he was heading away from me or if he might pass nearby, so I held my breath and listened, afraid to move a muscle. After some time, I couldn't wait any longer. I just got up and ran out of there, going back the way I had come in. Driving home, I contemplated how sometimes you don't come to the fork in the stream. Sometimes the fork in the stream comes to you. Life isn't just a pile of wonderful potential presents. It can also deliver some rude awakenings as well. Take a card from the chance pile. It might be good, or you might go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200, you know what I mean, Vern? And the last year, for me, has been one big wet Dogman of a year. I have to say that. So, if Dogman was an omen or portent that the next phase of my life was going to smell like dog poo, then it has indeed come true. Sadly, I bet a lot of you can relate to that sentiment right now. You can learn a lot if you listen to the babbling brooks here in Virginia, just as much as I learned from the Dogman of Hollywood, the Disco Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This is a story that happened to me way back when I was a recent high school graduate, which was either 1977 or 78. I'm too old to care any longer. There had been a super hot disco girl in my graduating class who lived on the other side of town. Even those of us who were against disco were crazy about that girl. Let's call her Julie because she was tall like Julie Newmar, and she wore skin-tight, shiny outfits like Catwoman. Julie dated who you would expect her to date, a rich, rude, blonde jerk who had pushed me around since kindergarten. Let's call him Hans, although he wasn't actually a German from World War II at all. I don't think he was. Julie had always been polite to me in school, and I respected her for that since she risked her status by being friendly to someone like me. For that reason, I never pushed my luck, and I generally kept a wide, if friendly, distance between myself and Julie. Right after graduation, like really a week after, I was walking home from the store where I bought baseball cards and comic books from with my new stash. There was a little wild area behind my house that I would cut through when coming home from that direction. I wasn't sure if anyone owned the property, and the house next to it had been empty since the previous owner had passed on when I was much younger. On that sunny summer afternoon, though, I was surprised to see a moving truck, moving men, and a couple of women moving into the house next to the wild area. Walking closer, I was stunned to see that it was Julie and her mom. I tried to look away quickly when I saw who it was, but it was too late. Julie called to me in a friendly manner. Putting a fake smile on my face, I looked up and waved, but was again surprised to see that she was running playfully toward me. That was a sight my young body was unprepared for. Halter tops were popular that season, and I'm telling you, I stopped breathing and oxygen was not going to my brain any longer. Upon reaching me, she immediately grabbed me by my arm, sending shivers through my innocent young self. I was dragged over to her mother and introduced as her mom's new assistant mover. Then she introduced her mom to me as my new boss and ran off giggling to grab another box to move inside. My mother happened to drive by during this in her 1976 Lincoln Continental. That car was so wide that you'd have to shout for the driver to hear the person in the passenger seat. It was like using an ocean liner to putter around the neighborhood, but my mother was big on buying exclusively American-made products. That's why I was so surprised when after Dad passed, she married that guy from Trinidad, but anyway, that's not part of this story. Mom saw me helping the ladies move in, and she introduced herself. Later, she made me come with her to deliver a homemade pie and a welcome to the neighborhood. The two moms hit it off, and Julie took me to her room to put disco clothes on me and laugh at me. I managed not to faint, which for me at the time was being smooth and suave. Julie started showing me disco dance moves, and I'm ashamed to say I learned whatever she taught. I knew it was wrong. I knew disco was evil, but I also knew that if I learned those moves, Julie would hang out with me more. And that's pretty much how I became this new instant boyfriend. I let her take me shopping, and I'd wear whatever idiotic, embarrassing clothes she bought for me because it meant I was her guy. This went on for a while. It was the 2 or 3 best weeks of my life up to that point. And then, one night, after dinner, I decided to walk over through the dark woods and see what Julie was doing. Almost as soon as I stepped outside, I felt a cold wind blow out of nowhere, sending a chill through me. Instantly afterward, the hot, muggy night took hold, the kind of air so steamy wet that you almost need gills to breathe it. It was almost a chore putting one foot in front of the other. The heat was so oppressive. But then why was I still shivering all over as I entered the silent woods between our houses? It was eerily quiet in those trees that night. I don't literally mean no crickets chirping like some people say, but it was a lot quieter than it normally was. My ears kept popping as though the air pressure were changing over and over again. I had the weird sense that something odd was going on in front of me, but I'm not sure why. I didn't see anyone there, and I didn't hear anyone there either. I don't remember any odd odors, and yet for some reason, I called out ahead of myself, asking if anyone was there. I didn't get an answer, so I tentatively wandered further into the trees, keeping my eyes and popping ears open. For some reason, I felt certain there was someone up ahead, waiting to ambush me. When I was, I guess, about 3/4 of the way there, I called out again, asking who was hiding in front of me. I was staring out 3 or 4 rows of trees ahead of me, straining to make out any movement over there. From about 5 feet in front of me, rising from his hiding spot behind a ridiculously small bush, there rose a big, hairy, nightmare version of a werewolf. It had an overbite so severe, it looked saber-toothed. It was a dirty blonde color, with long fur that blew in the breeze, like something out of a Hollywood salon. Using the modern terminology, I was seeing a dogman, really. It wasn't like Michael Landon in Wolfman makeup wearing his school jacket. This was an animal with a wolf-like head that sprang up to a standing position like a man would. It was a big, blonde dogman, I suppose. I evacuated on the spot before turning to run home crying and screaming. I was a complete mess and had to jump in the shower and get changed. When I was drying off, my mother told me Julie was on the phone. I asked her to hang on. I put some clothes on quick. When I got to the phone, though, she had hung up already. My mom told me she left a message that she couldn't see me that night. Her boyfriend, Hans, had just gotten back to town after his family's vacation. That was the end of that. She and Hans spent the rest of the summer together, then went off to college together. I never saw her again when she wasn't with him. Some people think that seeing a cryptid can be a bad omen. It certainly was for me after I saw the Disco Dogman. Today's executive producer is one who we've seen before. He once made a one-time donation to the channel, but now he's back as a regular contributor and a channel member. So please welcome back once and future executive producer, Alexander Hersier. I wrote a rhyme for him, but it's got really obscure words in it. I need a drummer. Okay, hang on. He's Alexander, but call him Alex. He's a leader, call him Malik. Had more bush than a big green salad, and your big toe is your Hallex. Thanks, Alex. We really appreciate your contribution. We couldn't do it without cool people like you. And if you'd like to be as cool as Alex the Malik, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Alex did and become a channel member by clicking the join link below. And now, it's time to get to our first story of the episode. This is the one depicted in today's thumbnail. It was sent in to us from Florida by someone who claims it actually happened to them. And we call this tale, I Saw Dogman Drinking from the River. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story about a monster sighting I made around a year ago in Tate's Hell State Forest in Florida. It said online that the place was good to take children to, and I've been wanting to expose our son to nature. I grew up way out in the country, but my family and I live and work in our apartment in Tallahassee. My wife is from up north, so this is normal to her, but I want our son to have a more well-rounded upbringing. He's already becoming kind of a nerd, which is fine. I just want him to be a nerd who's in good shape and a friend of nature. My wife, who I feel is overprotective, sent me on ahead to check out the place one weekend by myself. She told me to take pictures or video and show her when I got back. If she felt it was safe enough, then we could go there for a weekend as a family. Nobody ever told that woman that life doesn't last forever. There isn't anything that any one of us can ever do to be safe. You can live in a rubber house to make sure you don't bang your head, and then you can get hit with some kind of organ failing you and check out that way. You can eat right and exercise, then get run over by a taxi driver who hasn't slept in 3 days. Life is random. It's either an adventure or it's a boring attempt to stay safe while death bides its time, laughing at your efforts. So I went to Tate's Hell, looking for cool things to take pictures of to show my son, and safe things to take pictures of for my wife. I found some kind of river in there, or maybe a large creek. The water was moving, but not all that quickly. Maybe my wife might think slow-moving water was safe. Maybe my son might think it was cool. I certainly did, and I sat down in the shade along the small river or large stream, and I leaned back against a tree, and I fell asleep right there. When I woke up, the afternoon was starting to get long in the shadows. I was going to have to get up and decide if I wanted to pitch my tent somewhere or walk back to the car and get home in time to watch some YouTube before bedtime. As I was still waking up and groggy, stretching my arms and yawning, I caught sight of it. Right there, across the water from me, was this big, hairy thing with coarse-looking long fur. The color of the fur or hair was that color that women dye their hair that is red, but not red like a ginger. It's that fake-looking, more magenta kind of shade. This creature seemed to use the same number dye as the lady who lives diagonally across the street from my family, and it had its head down toward the slow-moving water. Standing up, in surprise and fear, I could see that it was cupping water in its left paw and raising it to its mouth to lick up. I was mainly seeing its back and shoulders bent down to the river. When the animal finished drinking, it pulled back and sat on the incline toward the creek for a while, relaxing. It kind of sat like a monkey might, and it had what looked like monkey hands and animal feet as well. Its head looked nothing at all like any kind of ape or simian. It had a canine head on top of its otherwise uncanine body. The creature had that same magenta reddish coloring on its head, but it had white fur around the mouth and a very dark or black fur on the uppermost tips of its tall wolf-like ears. Some of the fur on its chest had a similar shade of white, but it was mainly covered in the magenta-orange shade. The skin, which showed on the palms and the bottoms of the feet, was a dark, grayish kind of non-color. I could tell very little of the disposition of the animal in that moment, as it was relaxed and had clearly not noticed me yet. It was looking around, though, so I knew it was only a matter of time until I was discovered. Preferring to be seen first while leaving, I made a hasty retreat. I did it as casually as I could, turning my back on the animal and never looking back. Believe me, my ears were tuned in for anything following me from behind, but all I heard back there was the sound of the water continuing to rush along peacefully. No, I did not take a photo of the creature. To be honest, I was too scared. I just wanted to be somewhere that it wasn't, as fast as I could manage. It looked as large as me or even larger, and I don't know who would have won the fight if it had come to that. Yeah, our son would have thought that a picture of that thing was cool, but if my wife saw it, I'd be banned from even taking him out to the backyard. I also wasn't thinking that I was seeing something that anyone would care about at the time. I know that shows I've been living under a rock, but I don't know what to say. I hadn't wandered over to that side of YouTube yet back then. I had heard of the Dogman at a party or something, but mainly I only knew Dogman as the cartoon character from the kids' books. And even when I started seeing Dogman videos on YouTube, I didn't at first make the connection. I didn't really think of what I saw as being like a werewolf at the time, although I guess I might have if I had seen him standing up instead of sitting there. Plus, most descriptions of Dogman don't match what I saw in every aspect. For instance, I've never yet found a story about someone seeing a Dogman that was the color of that lady's hair dye. I usually hear about brown or black Dogmen, not that weird orangey red magenta kind of shade. Some of the more respected researchers into these subjects that I've listened to seem to think that these creatures are something other than just real normal animals. They talk about them coming from another dimension or whatever. I don't know enough to say that's not true, but I know that whatever I saw drank water just like all real and normal animals do. It breathed air and drank water. That doesn't sound supernatural or paranormal to me. Then again, if I had seen it vanish in a flash of light, as some people say they've seen, I might have my mind changed very quickly. I did have a great feeling of fear being so close to something that was my size or larger, but I don't think it was an unnatural kind of fear. If it had been a bear or a big cat, I'd have been equally as uncomfortable and had the identical desire to get out of there quickly and quietly. It was wild. It appeared to either be a carnivore or an omnivore, and so it might have considered having me for dinner. That was really the only part of the story that was on my mind in that moment. So, I showed my wife the pictures, and we ended up doing what she called a compromise, which is that we went to Cascades Park in Tallahassee. The wife said it would be more educational than where I wanted to go. This year, she won't let the kid leave the house for fear he'll be exposed to something. She's afraid to let him breathe air. If she could stop him from doing it, I think she would. I still have dreams about that weird dog man with the black-tipped ears. In the dream, I'm having a picnic with my family by the lake. I notice that the dog man seems to be stalking my wife, who won't stop talking about something she views herself an expert on. Blah, blah, blah. She was talking so loudly, she couldn't even hear the predator approaching her from behind. Then, just before the reddish magenta dogman finally takes my wife away from me forever, my alarm clock goes off and it's time to go back to work again. I look over at the other side of my bed, and my wife is still there, which I'm happy about, of course. I mean, why wouldn't I be? Still, those are the nature of my dreams, ever since that late afternoon when I saw Dogman drinking from the river. The Dogman who liked blueberries. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am a long-time Bigfoot hunter, but I choose to remain anonymous in this story because I am writing to you to admit that I have experienced a Dogman sighting. I never believed in the Dogman, and my Bigfoot hunting friends would give me a load of guff if they knew that I now accept him as real. But what else can I do after having an up-close and personal experience with a real-life Dogman? Now, I had developed a way to hunt Sasquatch that was different from anyone else's plan, at least any other plan that I'd ever heard. I would disguise my scent and hide among bushes and foliage in a blind I had constructed near blueberry bushes when they are in season. It's possible that lots of people had this idea before me, but even if they did, I came up with the idea on my own one day. Native legends and David Paulides both seem to imply that Bigfoot like blueberries, and also that they will kidnap humans from the vicinity of such plants. I, at the time, was of the opinion that Bigfoot was a shy and gentle vegetarian, so I arrogantly and foolishly ignored the native legends. I should have been far better prepared to go into such a potentially hostile environment, and I shouldn't have gone in alone. I hope you heed my warning. Do not do what I have done. I went squatch hunting in this manner about a half dozen times before the incident I'm about to describe to you. Nothing interesting had ever happened before, and I have to admit, I was dozing off and half asleep when I was suddenly hit with a stench that braced me like taking a whiff of smelling salts. Something had just come nearby that could use some Dr. Squatch's soap, I'll tell you that much. I immediately thought of the legendarily smelly cryptid we all know as Bigfoot. Who else could have caused a blueberry bush to suddenly smell like death with indigestion? And then I saw it. Brown fur poking out from the side of the bush. I wasn't sure yet. It might be a brown bear. It might not be a Sasquatch at all. Now, while I had convinced myself that Sasquatches were not dangerous to be around, I had no such conviction about bears. I still wanted to see what that smelly animal was, but I wanted to be cautious about it. The safer thing to do would have been to stay in my blind and hope that the creature would eventually come into view. I rarely do the safe thing, and honestly, it's a miracle I'm still alive and kicking with the dumb chances I've taken. And this was one of those times. Climbing slowly, painfully, and hopefully quietly out of my blind, I kept myself as low to the ground as possible, and, crawling on my belly, I maneuvered about 30 feet to my right. I could now see the back of the creature better, but still all I was seeing was back hair. It was a big, brown, hairy animal. I knew exactly as much as I had known when I was within the relative safety of my hunting blind. Do you know how sometimes when people encounter a large predator, especially a cryptid, and they say that all the animals in the forest went quiet, even the crickets? Well, nothing like that was happening here. I heard the crickets as loudly as any other time, and I watched as a small bird landed on a branch just over the big brown back of the blueberry-eating creature. The huge dark creature reacted so fast I nearly got whiplash looking at it. 1 second, the bird was on the branch. Next second, a long, dark, hairy arm was extended, ending in a black, paw-like hand clutching the bird. And before the third second could start, that formerly airborne creature was lunch for the cryptid predator who now rose to his full height. I froze in place, looking up at the unexpectedly large and apparently meat-eating creature. I found myself looking up, over 10 feet off the ground, where there was a canine head, chewing its food and swallowing. This was not a Sasquatch. It was a canine that stood over 10 feet high on its hind legs. It was a canine with arms and hands. It was not a shy and gentle vegetarian. It was the North American, upright, walking canine. I was in deep trouble. I had been so careless that I hadn't even made note as to whether I were upwind or downwind from this huge omnivore. You probably know, but in case you don't, omnivore means it eats everything. Me? I'm part of everything, so I felt extremely threatened in that moment. I could have looked up endangered species on my phone and seen my own sad face looking back at me. It was time for me to check out. The maids needed to clean the room that once was my life. I went from curious Bigfoot hunter to loser, accepting that his story was about to end in about 2 seconds flat. Fortunately, my body has a survival instinct built in, and also, fortunately, it was hardwired in and given permission to overrule my occasionally stupid mind. While I was saying goodbye cruel world in my head, my feet were making their quiet way backward, away from the dog-headed ape-man as he chewed his snack. The eyes were rolling around in his head, and boy was he enjoying his food. I was not yet a part of what he was aware of, and my body was making full use of that to edge further and further back. I held my breath and began assisting my body in its attempt to save both of us. And as I watched, that Dogman finished chewing the bird, and then he bent back down and returned to eating the berries off that bush. I knew it was my chance, and I didn't waste it. Immediately turning around, I put every aspect of my mind and body to work on the project of escaping that scene. My heart pumped madly and excitedly. Tears ran down my cheeks, but they were now tears of hope and joy. I had a chance to survive. I hadn't thought I would only moments earlier. It was like Christmas for me in my mind, even though I knew I still had to succeed in my escape. Just knowing I hadn't struck out, that I still had another chance to get that runner home, figuratively speaking, just knowing that the game wasn't over yet, that was enough to fill me with absolute exciting pleasure. I never felt so much energy surging through my body. The further I got away from the scene, the faster I ran. I leaped over bushes. I spun around trees. I acted as though I were some kind of athlete. And I guess for that one moment in time, I was so pumped with adrenaline that maybe I actually was. I practically leaped into my car when I reached it and sped out of there like I was fired out of a slingshot. On my way home, I thought I was obeying the speed limit, but an officer was kind enough to pull me over and correct that misapprehension. He asked me if I had been crying, and I said yes. He asked me why, and I told him that he wouldn't believe me. He insisted that he'd seen everything in his day and I should give him a try. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and told him, "Well, I just saw a dog-headed skunk ape out in the wilderness, and now I want to go home and pull the covers over my head." I looked up at him, wondering if I would next have to get out of the car and perform a sobriety test. Instead, the officer just dismissively told me to get out of there. He seemed to think I was bonkers, but at least he didn't think I was under the influence of anything, so I was allowed to go. Since that day, I no longer think that Bigfoot is a safe creature to be around. I know that sounds like a non sequitur because I didn't see a Bigfoot, I saw a Dogman. But the thing is, if it had been a Bigfoot, I think it would have been just about as dangerous and frightening to be around as the Dogman was. I think any large animal is dangerous to be around. It's only logical. It's crazy to think that Bigfoot or any wild animal is our friend. And he's probably not a vegetarian either. To survive in bodies that large, I think Sasquatch must be an omnivore. It must eat anything it can get into its mouth. I can assure you that Dogman is not a carnivore. It is most definitely an omnivore. Dogman will eat anything. Take it from me, I nearly ended up as lunch for the Dogman, who liked blueberries. Today's executive producer is someone we honored fairly recently, I think, but she has since upgraded her membership, so we really want to thank Sheila Roberts for upgrading to a higher level of channel membership. That's something you can join too, simply by clicking the join link underneath this video. That's why Sheila gets access to our new secret uncensored scary stories each Sunday, plus our archive of over 10 hours of scary and uncensored Dogman stories far too wild to run on this channel. If we ever lost Ms. Roberts, we would have to call the coppers. We thank you, dear kind Shelia, and we mean it most sincerely. Well, you rhyme something with Shelia. See what you come up with. Thanks again, Shelia. We hope you liked today's story. It's about a guy whose wife... Well, let's just let him tell his own story, which is called... Dogman. Threw my wife from her horse. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm a wealthy entrepreneur in my 50s with a new young second wife in her late 20s. I don't care if you have judgments about that, as I rarely hear rich old ladies with young male consorts being criticized for doing the same thing. I feel genuine love for my wife, and she says she loves me back. My private detective has never caught her cheating on me, so maybe she really does. I'd like to have a son or daughter to pass my fortune on to, and so my wife, who we can call Darla, is my hope for the future of my family. I want her to have everything when I'm gone, and I want her to pass it on to our child or children if we can manage to have any. We've only been married a little over a year, so I'm still quite hopeful that we can achieve these goals. One of my wife's hobbies that I indulge her in is horseback riding. She recently had an accident and nearly was severely injured. She was bedridden for most of July recovering from her injuries, even though it could have been far worse. I want her to sell her horse and take up jogging or something else less dangerous than horseback riding. But she insists that all we need to do is increase security. You see, my young wife says that what happened to her was not an accident. Darla claims that she and her horse were charged by a dogman, and that her horse, in fact, saved her life. I'll give you the story as close as I can remember to the way she gave it to me. Darla and Star, her horse, were racing back and forth in the field next to the woods in the back of our property. According to what she says, as they were running along the wood line at top speed just for the fun of it, seeing how fast they could go, a great bipedal beast leaped out of the woods in front of them, blocking their path and threatening them. It was a man-like but hairy beast, taller than a normal man, and it was entirely naked, but covered with gray fur like an animal. The man's head was entirely inhuman, looking more like the head of a dog than that of a man. The vicious man-thing was growling and snapping at Star, who reared up in the air, throwing my wife from his back. She wasn't found for over an hour by one of our workmen who saw the horse standing by the woodline and wondered what he was doing over there. As the workman approached the horse, he saw my wife laying unconscious on the ground and ran to get her help. He did not report seeing a dogman. When my wife was able to regain consciousness and speak sensibly again, she told us of how her brave horse Star defended her against the large manimal. Star stood up on his hind legs, same as the bipedal dogman creature, and he used his front hooves to counter the claws and teeth of the dogman, pushing him back abruptly and harshly. Darla says she watched as Star beat the dogman back into the woods until he ran off squealing like a hurt puppy with his tail between his legs. I myself don't know what to make of any of this. I'm having video cameras installed around the entire perimeter of the property now, which is something I probably should have done years ago. We've discussed somehow fencing the property in, but so far none of the ideas we've had really seem feasible or like they would be effective. I still think the most logical solution to this situation would be for my wife to take up a less dangerous hobby, but when I say that, it falls on deaf ears. She's young, and she needs to live with danger. It's an aspect of youth I had forgotten about. I want to keep her in a padded bubble, protected from all possible harm, but She needs to live her life as more than just potential mother to my offspring, so I need to find a way to keep that beast off my property. The only answer people are giving me is to set up trail cams, since the monster does not like to be photographed. For that reason, I have a trail cam on every other tree, facing in all directions, into that forest for 40 feet deep. If the thing does come back, we should at least get photographic evidence of it, so that we can maybe tell what we're dealing with. My wife is walking again and she's recovering quickly. She will be back riding again within a month, and I know that's my time limit for solving this situation. I don't just love her as the potential inheritor of my wealth. I genuinely love her as much as you can love someone else. I don't want to see her hurt in any manner. I've hired a new man to monitor my wife when she rides. I've given him a little office I had built adjoining the stables. He can spend his days as he sees fit, searching the internet and getting paid to do it. All I care is that when my wife decides to ride her horse Star, that this man is there to monitor the entire thing. I want him stationed between her and the woods. I never want that Dogman to be able to have a second chance at my wife and her horse. I know that a perfect solution is a fantasy, but I aim to come as close as I can. If you know of any effective ways to keep a Dogman off of one's property, please share them with me. My wife will continue to place herself in danger, and I must provide her with as much safety as I can under the circumstances. Please, anyone who can hear this, I beg of you, share with me your knowledge. I need to keep this animal thing away from my precious wife, Darla. Please, for her sake if not for mine, help me learn how to keep this Dogman away from our land. Thank you for listening. I hope I didn't ramble on too much, but I haven't been myself anymore since Dogman threw my wife from her horse.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored Dogman stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. If you have a scary experience you want to tell us about, you can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com, or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LES-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.